Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. I am broadcasting from Israel in on this occasion, and our speaker happens to be in Israel as well, not so many kilometers away from me. Harif, for those who don't know us, is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. And our mission is to raise awareness of the history, culture, and heritage of Middle Eastern and North African Jews. Please do look at our website, which is www.harif.org. And there you will find all the details of our upcoming events. And to receive Zoom details, you have to be subscribed to our mailing list. And the good news is it's all free. We've got a sister website or blog that keeps you up to date with the news. It's called Point of No Return, and you can access it by clicking on news on the Harif website. This session is being recorded. I hope it'll be up on the Harif video channel very shortly. And our speaker is happy to take questions, or if you have a comment, please do put it in the chat at the bottom of your screen.
Do you just want to mention that Harif is a charity?
Yeah.
If
So
you want to make donations,
I must
can be
mention
received.
Harif is a very small charity run by volunteers, and of course we always welcome donations.
But no obligation to give one.
But Laura says there's no obligation to give one. Of course not. Anyway, so on to the subject of tonight's talk, Jews of Mosul. Now, we did have a talk by Dina Attar, who I'm very pleased to see is on this call in March 2021. And you can actually see the recording on the Harif video channel. That's March 2021. But it's time to revisit the subject of Mosul. Mosul is the second largest city in Iraq, and it did have a thriving Jewish community with roots going back to the Assyrian exile. No Jews live there now. The community having fled mostly to Israel in 1950-51, but the challenge of preserving its memory and heritage remains, especially after the onslaught by ISIS in northern Iraq in 2014. And in fact, when you mention the name Mosul, this is what people think of. They think of the great battle and the siege of Mosul in 2014 when the Americans and the British defeated ISIS. So we're very pleased to revisit the subject of the Jews of Mosul. Our speaker, Nadav Yidgar, will give an overview of the Jews' history in Mosul with a particular focus on the Ottoman and British periods. Now, he has long had a passion for history and for this Jewish community in particular. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Nadav for Jews of Mosul. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here online today with you. Thank you so much, Lynn, for inviting me. Our topic today will be the story of the Jews of Mosul. First, about the author, the researcher, I have based my reading on the important book, An Enhanced Research on Mosul and its Jewish Community Along the History, 418 pages of facts, documents, and interviews with major pillars of the community, written during the 60s until the 80s in Israel by Mr. Ezra Laniado, Zichrono Livracha. Actually, his brother, Mr. Moti Laniado, is joining us now on that call. Ezra was born in Mosul in 1929, made an Aliyah in 1951. He's a teacher and then a headmaster of the high school in Tirat Carmel. He was also an elected mayor of Tirat Carmel for more than 8 years. He established and headed the Mosul Jewish Organization in Israel. He passed away in September 29th in 1990. Yes. Good. Sorry about that. Pyrotechnic. Okay. Let's first see generally about Mosul, geography. Mosul is located in the northern part of Iraq, very close to Erbil and close also to the border with Iran. Population of 1,700,000 people. Actually, it's the second largest city in Iraq after Baghdad. A little bit about some facts. The area where Mosul lies was an integral part of Assyria from as early as 25th century BC after the Akkadian Empire, 2335 BC until 2154, which united all the people of Mesopotamia under one rule. Mosul again became continuous part of Assyria from about 2050 BC through the fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire between 612 to 599 BC. Mosul remained within the geopolitical province of Assyria for another 13 centuries as part of the Roman Assyria until the early Muslim conquests of the mid-7th century. Mosul was built on the Tigris River, Hiddekel, beside the ancient city of Nineveh, which was the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Mosul was just a small fortress on the west bank of the Tigris River when Nineveh was the capital in a glorious city. After Nineveh destruction, the little fortress of Mosul became a small village, which gradually became a town consisting of three parts: the Christian, the Persian, or the Magi, Amgosh, and the Jewish. Mosul was conquered by the Arabs, by Omar ben al-Khatib in 641. Marwan II, from 744, developed the city by bringing the cotton fabric production to Mosul. Muslim, actually might be the source name of Mosul. Fabrics were exported to Europe and Mosul became rich and prosperous city. The Seljuks added Mosul to their empire in 1095. The Mongols conquered it in 1257. Mosul was surrounded by wall with a wide and deep tunnel outside of it and had 11 gates. Today, only few remains of the wall left, which was destroyed over the years and wars. Mosul was always an important crossroad to the north and was connected to Baghdad by train only in 1940. Mosul is also an airport, and the Tigris River was used often as commercial transportation mean to Baghdad. Now, the Jews of Mosul, there are assumption of some facts that the Jews who came to Mosul came from one community in northern Samaria in the Israeli kingdom. Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III started the exile during 733 BC. It was finalized in 722 BC by Sargon II. During the Islamic conquest in 641, the Jewish community is mentioned at the first time, Mahlat el-Yahud. In the letters of Cairo Genizat Kahir, in 1237, the Jewish community was mentioned again. At that time, the Muslims treated the Jews and Christians as one God believers, hence didn't force them to change their religion, but did charge them with gazia, a poll tax. They were considered as a second-degree citizens, but the local government, the Harif, secured them and made sure they have religious and economical freedom. Next mentioned during the 10th century, while the Jewish philosopher Ibn Abu Sa'id al-Musli communicated with the Christian philosophers, his name indicates his origin, his location. Also at the same century, the leader of the Jewish community was Chefetz Aluf ben Yetzchayek HaAshuri, who wrote the enhanced mitzvot book in Arabic. He was nominated into his position by Gaon Aaron Khalef of Ben Serjadu. And in some communications between the Gaon and Aluf, the Jewish community of Mosul is mentioned. This is a little bit about the Jewish population. We will revisit that again, but as you can see, the numbers change and the names of the people who found this information as well. The writer Abu el-Khir Taba ben Tzalchon wrote, the biblical poet critics moved to Mosul together with Rabbi Saadia Gaon in 920. And now, during the history, some information was given to us by travelers. During 1160 and 1170, the Spanish Jewish traveler Rabbi Benjamin Metudela of Tudela visited many countries and Jewish communities, among them in Mosul. He wrote in his memories, and from there 2 days to Mosul, it is the big Assyria, and there were 7,000 Jews headed by Rabbi Zakkai from King David descendants, and it is the beginning of Persia. It is very large land from ancient times, and it sits on the Tigris River. Between Mosul and the Great Inve, only one little bridge, which was destroyed. We can learn from Benjamin of Tudela that there was growth of the population of the Jews. It is an important community because as Rabbi Zakkai, a direct descendant of King David, headed the community, and the Jews had prosperity and freedom during the Caliphs and the Muslims. And I'm trying to see the map. Yes. Now you can see the map of the travels of Benjamin of Tudela. And you can see that Mosul and Baghdad and all the the dark blue area of the northern part, Basra, Mosul, and Baghdad are there. The 18th century, during the 18th century, there were visitors who came from Israel, Rabbi Yehuda Divan in 1730, Rabbi Nissim Egozi, who also died and buried in Mosul with the Jewish community there, Rabbi Moshe Daidon from Tzfat, Rabbi Eliyahu Lev Aryeh, Rabbi Mordechai Saidon. Many rabbis came to visit, many travelers came. In March 1766, the Danish traveler Nibuar visited Mosul and wrote a lot about the Jews. He mentioned the local Christians and Arabs hated the Jews. They were traitors and they lived in fear and humiliation from mainly the Christians. He mentioned that there are 150 Jewish families and they enjoyed from some freedom by the Ottomans. There was a blood label in 1763. The Jews were blamed of a Christian boy death. The Christians made complaint to the Pecha as they did not have evidence that the Jews were ordered. Then the Jews were ordered to pay 1,000 ducats, which was a lot of money those days, and the decree was revoked. The main activities of the Jews during the Ottoman Empire, the 18th century, were trade. They have mainly traded with Baghdad and Haleb, Aleppo, and later with India. With Baghdad and Aleppo, the connections were also religious and cultural, tried to create weddings between the communities. The 19th century, in 1822, visited in Mosul Rabbi David de Beit Hillel, originally from Vilna in Lithuania, who made an aliyah to Tzfat in Israel in 1815, and he wrote the following: Mosul is Assyria, is the large city surrounded by a wall western to the Tigris River. Many commodities are being traded on the river: meat, fishery, vegetables, and even pomegranate wine, and more. There are many cemeteries, while the local believe that Jewish prophets are buried there. There are 600 Jewish families. Some are important traders, rich, and many craftsmen. They have a beautiful, ancient, large synagogue. There are 2,000 Christian families and 30,000 Muslim families. The local Pesha is reporting to the head of Pesha in Baghdad. An English missionary, Joseph Wolfe, visited Mosul on 19th of March, 1824, and found 200 families with strong community, big synagogues, and a Talmud Torah, the first I mentioned, sort of studying location in Mosul Jewish community. He met with the head of yeshiva, Rabbi Saliman, who mentioned that his grandfather bought a new testimony from a priest and translated it to Hebrew, so the Jewish community in Mosul can learn about the habits and the traditions of their neighbors, the Christians. Other travelers were Rabbi Baruch Pinsk, Rabbi Shneor Zalman Mandel, who was part of Chabad those days, and mentioned a big and rich community with ancient buildings from days of King Sennacherib. The missionaries Vikras and Sternhorst found 300 families in 1847, headed by Chacham Elazar. And then Israel Joseph Benjamin II in 1848, in 1848, from Moldova, visited Mosul, described the ancient ruins of Nineveh, and in the middle of Nineveh, the grave of the prophet Yonah. He found 450 families who are active in trade and the production of cotton, muslin, and export to Europe via Baghdad. He described that the main population is Turks, Armenians, and Jews. The Jews and Turks were dressed the same, he mentioned, red fez and a white dress. And the fact that already then there were representatives of England and France in Mosul. The Ottomans were famous in sophisticated formats of collecting taxes. Benjamin tells us also about during the first half of the 19th century, there were few floods in Mosul who created losses of trades. The Jews, the authorities did not consider them. They even increased the taxes for the Jews. The local community has decided that whomever visiting the city will pay the Jewish community a fee to be contributed for the Jewish center in Mosul. They call it Gabila. Of course, Jewish visitors started to come and visit Mosul for them. Another traveler, Peterman, who visited Mosul between 1854 and 1870, found 200 Jewish families located all in one quarter, in the Jewish quarter. Obermeyer, another traveler, described that he found 300 Jewish families. As you can see, it's inconsistent, the numbers, but this is the information written by those travelers. And in 1880, Edelman wrote that there were 60,000 inhabitants in Mosul, among them 2,000 Jews. He also wrote that the glory days of the community are over. Some were very poor and a sad community that he found. The Ottoman period, the economic situation of the Jews knew some ups and downs, suffered from some nature disasters during the 19th century, floods, diseases, and hunger. Their safety and security were very low, as the local weak Pecha did not help them much. They lived in a closed community and didn't mingle with the others. From 1902 to 1904, there were 2 murder cases of Jews who'd been solved, and the Muslim murderer was caught and put in prison for 10 years. He was violent and hounded Jews for protection money. This insecure situation ended in 1908, the Young Turks Revolution, as the Pecha tried to blame the Jews to divert the Muslim population turbulences due to the bad economy, but the last minute he avoided from hurting the Jewish community, and they saved. The Pecha Sultan Abd Hamid removed the new regime. He was removed and the new regime came to power. The Young Turks, who changed the attitude towards the Jews positively all around the Ottoman Empire, also in Mosul. In 1908 to 1909, the Jewish community flourished, and the peak was the opening of the first large-scale Jewish school, Alliance, Kol Israel Chaverim, with the support of the French consular, who had good relationship with the head of Jewish community, Maurice Sidi. One for boys and one for the girls, on the name and contribution by Kaduri family, very famous family in Iraq. At that time, Maurice Sidi, with his contacts, was able to expose the Jewish community, their traditions and values, with all the rest of the population in Mosul, with the foreign consulars and the representatives. For the first time in 1909, the local wali, the head of the city, and many officials, parliament members, city councillors, judges, police officers, and also the British, German, and French councillors visited the Jewish quarter during Chag Sukkot. The Jews decorated the streets and opened their houses for their neighbors and the officials. Due to that, the prestige of the Jews increased greatly. At that year, the same time, there was the Ramadan. So the Jews hosted many Muslims in the evenings with good food, which also helped the positive atmosphere in the city. The Wali even asked the military orchestra to perform concert in the Jewish Alliance School, Alliance. In the Jewish quarter, in one of these evenings, when he and the other officials visited, the Jews felt elated, happy, and united as never before. Since that year, the involvement of the Jewish leaders in the local activities and authorities was increased and appreciated. A little bit about the economy. El Askarli tax. It's a ransom tax for the young Jews who didn't serve the Ottoman army. It was collected from all Jewish communities until 1908, until the Young Turks Revolution. And since then, the Jews must join the army or pay a very high fee, 30 golden liras, and some families could not pay it. Hence, the young Jews were recruited, at least some of them. That happened until World War I, 1914. The participation of the Jews towards the early years of 19th century, Jews could not participate in public positions, but it changed at the beginning of the 20th century. Jews were allowed to be members, cities, council, and in high court, along with the Muslims and Christian members. Among them, Yaakov Musa Gabay, Yaakov Tzemach, Abdel Aziz, he was a member of the court, and Shlomo Sasson was elected for the city council, firstly in 1903. After the Young Turks revolutions, their participation increased. Oh, sorry. As you can see in the pictures here, this is how the school alliance looked at 1930 and in 1934, and by the name of Kaduri, Lawrence Kaduri and Arima Kaduri. So we are reaching to World War I, 1914. Immediately, the Ottoman government started to recruit all men from 18 to 60, all over the empire. It came by surprise and caught the Turks unready. They gave rifles to the Jewish new soldiers, but no uniform and no training at all. The fee to avoid recruitment was cancelled. Therefore, all Jews from 18 until 60 must join the army. Some religious workers were exempt from service. Obviously, there were some deserters, not many, who could hide most of the time and ran to the outskirts villages. Some were arrested and sent back to the front. Hundreds of Jews joined the 3 different battalions were gathered in Mosul. Approximately 6,000 soldiers total. They were sent to Aleppo, to Basra and Homs, and from there to the front. Some of them stayed in Basra. Some of the Jewish soldiers that left Mosul to the war were sent to Basra, left in Basra, and kept their lives in Basra. Due to the movement of populations within the Ottoman Empire and hosting groups of Russian POWs, prisoners of wars, there were some newcomers to Mosul, among them Jews, mainly from Erbil and Kirkuk. 50 families of them stayed in Mosul after the war. In between 1916 and 1970s, there was a year of hunger. Sanat al-Ala. The Ottoman army was defeated in all fronts, and they pushed to get more soldiers from the communities. There were less available working hands in the agriculture. Most of the supply was sent to the army. Anyway, prices of black market increased dramatically, which created the year of hunger. Many died in the streets of Mosul that year. The Jewish community in Mosul suffered, but due to the help from rich families and the support of the Jews of Baghdad, their situation was much better. At the end of the war, with the arrival of the first British officers in Mosul, they have instructed to open all Turkish and German grains storages and barns to feed the population immediately. On November 6, 1914, the British attacked the Ottoman army in the Shait al-Arab region, and within 2 weeks took control of Basra. It was not until April 15 that the British began to advance north towards Baghdad, and the first significant battle between the sides took place in November 1915 near Safson, about 40 kilometers south of Baghdad. The battle ended inconclusively, and both sides withdrew to regroup. The British army established itself in the city of Kut, about 170 kilometers south of Baghdad, and on December 3rd, 1915, and 4 days later, the Ottomans arrived in the city and imposed a siege that lasted until the end of April 1916. On April 29th, 1916, the British surrendered unconditionally. 23,000 British and Indian soldiers were killed or wounded at Kut, and 8,000 of those who survived the siege were taken prisoners. Most of them died later or subsequently murdered. The results of the Battle of Kut were a severe blow to the British Army, and all of its commanders in the region were replaced. The forces began to train and prepare for almost 8 months until the British attack was renewed on December 1960 along both banks of the Tigris. On March 1917, Baghdad fell to the British, who were welcomed there as liberators. The war entered standstill during the winter and was only resumed in February 1918. On October 30th, 1918, the Turkish Sixth Army surrendered and the British entered Mosul unhindered on November 14th, 1918. The war in the Mesopotamian area ended with its complete capture by the British. A little bit about the British mandate. As the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916, Mosul should have been part of the French influence. However, in December 1918, Lloyd George and Clemenceau of France agreed to change the agreement, and Mosul became of British influence, and in return, Britain gave the French some areas in Germany and the participation in the Ottoman Petroleum Company. Everybody knew that the area of Mosul had a lot of petroleum resources there, so the British wanted to keep that to themselves. The British entered Mosul in November 1918. However, the Mosul question, exactly that, was eventually referred to the League of Nations, a commission found in favor of Britain, and in 1926, treaty formalized Mosul's inclusion into the British-mandated territory of Iraq, officially. Sensitive location of petroleum, as I said. The British first actions were to open, as I said, all food barns and grain storages, which were captivated by the Ottomans, and they recruited thousands of unemployed people in Mosul. That eased the tension a little bit. The Ottoman residents left in rush, most of them, a day of celebration in the city, while Lieutenant Colonel Lichman entered the bridge of Mosul. You can see him in the pictures. He became the first political officer of Mosul, but later he will be murdered during the 1920 Arab uprising in Iraq by few Bedouin tribes. These events opened an economic flourishing era and started an emerging trade activity which never seen before in Iraq. New roads were paved, marble sidewalks, water pipes, and electricity poles were installed. There were new neighborhoods with new 4 to 5 stories houses, and the light came to the streets at nights. It's the British period. New cars arrived. Public parks were built, officers' clubs, new shops, and more. A great effort of development seemed in the southern new part of the city, where the governor and the clerics lived. However, the northern part, the Jewish quarter, nothing was built, nothing new, no constructions. It was still like a small ghetto. David Sasson, who was the headmaster of Alliance School before the war, came back to the city and found these radical changes, described the Jewish community to have 3,000 inhabitants before the war and now 5,000. Probably many Jews came from Kurdistan area. Later, when the military governor of Mosul was General Nadav, he had empathy towards the Jews, as he had some support from Jews during his captivity as a prisoner of the war by the Ottomans. And he got the support from Jews that were serving in the Ottoman army. He also visited the Jews and came to bless them for the holidays. There were approximately 800 POWs, Jewish Iraqi Ottoman soldiers, captured by the British in Mosul region alone. Salah Maryuma and Chacham Barazani approached the British headquarters, asking to send kosher food for Pesach and Matzot for these Jewish POWs. The governor has released all Jewish POWs for the Pesach vacation to their houses to be hosted in Mosul Jewish community. The British governor gave the local community even 10,000 rupees to cover their hosting and food expenses. That's how he was close and he show empathy to the Jewish community. The British governor was impressed by the unity and brotherhood of the Jews, taking care of each other, as he arranged an introduction party with all the city dignitaries. He spent a long time to speak with the Jewish delegates, asked about their situation, the way the Muslims treats them. At that time, the Jews felt more secured and protected by the British officers. Some Jews who knew languages worked for the new British officers as translators. Salim Tzemach, David Laniado, Ezra Ben Yona, some even became British officers. The independent Iraq, or through the British mandate, the British were attentive to the Iraqi people, knowing they wish and yearn to independence. And in 1921, they gave them independence, but only for appearance. They have converted the mandate agreement to a friendly agreement between Iraq and Great Britain, which keeps and secure the actual governance of Great Britain on the land of the two rivers, mainly to secure of the secure of petroleum and the trade. The first Iraqi Constituent Assembly in 1924, the agreement was approved, and there were 6 Jewish representatives in the assembly. One of them from Baghdad represented Mosul, Dr. Yehia Samika. The head of the Jewish community in Mosul were against the idea of independence Iraq, as they still remember the old bad days that the Ottomans were when the Muslims harassed the Jews. More than that, they have sent a letter to the British governor claiming their dissatisfaction and even suggested that if the British government will leave Mosul, they should take the Jews with them. This letter or declaration was published in the city and started sparks of tension between Muslims and Jews. Muslims claimed that the Jews are hurting the chances for Iraq to become independent. The British were delighted from the Jewish support. However, they have proceeded with the independence idea. Even King George V even sent a greeting card for the Jewish community in Mosul for Rosh Hashanah in 1921. As per the Assembly of 1924, the new suggested constitution claimed to have free voting power for all minorities in Iraq and the right of the Jews to elect 1 member of the Senate and 4 parliament representatives, 1 from Mosul, 2 from Baghdad, and 1 for Basra. Here you can see Sasson Tzemach, who was a member of the parliament from Mosul and a city council member. And in the middle, you can see the picture of Sasson with King Faisal and Menachem Salah Daniel. On the right hand, you can see a much later picture, the last Iraqi parliament before the Jewish members left in 1951. And you can see Sasson Tzemach, the 5th from the right on the first row. A little bit about the kingdom of Iraq, because the British, yes, they were the power there. They had mandate. They gave them independence, but all the time they stayed in the picture. They stayed in Iraq. In March 1921, at the Cairo conference, the British decided that Faisal, who was from the Hashemi family, he was a good candidate for ruling the British mandate of Iraq because of his apparent conciliatory attitude towards the great powers, and based on advice from Lawrence of Arabia and other people, they have nominated him to become the king of Iraq in 1921. Few people in Iraq even knew him. They knew who Faisal was or had heard of his name. With help of the British officials, including Gertrude Bell, he successfully campaigned among the Arabs of Iraq and won over the popular support of the minority of the Sunnis. His coronation was in the 23rd of August 1921 and ruled until his death in September 1933. He was liberal king and liked the Jews. In his days, the Jewish community felt secured. He also promoted Jews to high-ranked official positions in Iraqi establishment. He had Jewish friends, among them Ser Sasson Hezkel, who became his advisor and minister of finance. He was also a good friend of Ser Eliezer Kaduri, who built the Alliance School in Mosul. The king visited the Alliance School in Mosul. King Faisal died of a heart attack on 8th of September 1933 in Bern, Switzerland. Faisal was succeeded on the throne by his eldest son, Ghazi. You can see here the Kaduri family was a famous and rich family who expanded to the Far East, and Sasson Hezkel, the first minister of finance of Iraq in 1921 and a deputy parliament. The Anglo-Iraqi Treaty of 1930 provided for close alliance, for full and frank consultations between the two countries in all matters of foreign policy, and for mutual assistance in case of war. Iraq granted the British the use of air bases near Basra and in Khabinia, and the right to move troops across the country. The treaty of 25 years duration was to come into force upon Iraq's admission to the League of Nations. With signing the 1930 treaty and the settling of the Mosul question, Iraqi politics took on a new dynamic. The emerging class of Sunni and Shia land-owning tribal sheikhs vied for positions of power with wealthy and prestigious urban-based Sunni families and officers and bureaucrats. Because Iraq's newly established political institutions were the creation of foreign power, and because of the concept of democratic government had no precedent in Iraqi history, the politicians in Baghdad lacked legitimacy and never developed deeply rooted constituencies. Thus, despite the constitution and an elected assembly, Iraqi politics was more of a shifting alliance. The mandatory administration continued to operate until 1932. Faisal, although was born in Saudi Arabia, was proclaimed king of Syria, but was deposed by the French in July 1920. In light of these events, he received the monarchy of Iraq, as I explained before, which was then very divided from the British. The British RAF, the Air Force, played an important role in maintaining power and military control. And even there was a king in government and parliament in power in Iraq. In fact, the area remained under British administration until 1932, de facto. 1920, the Iraq revolt. For the first time, the Sunnis, the Shiites, the tribesmen, and the city people came together and cooperated for a short time, very short time, to the rebel against the British. The aspiration for a nation state from the social structure full of conflicts in Iraq. Also, a little bit about the Kurdistan. The Kurds, throughout the years, they aspired to independence and opposed annexation to Iraq. But the Sykes-Picot Agreement was not attentive to these aspirations. In 1921, the Kurds did not agree to the Faisal coronation by the British. Faisal was very dependent on the British economically and military-wise. A financial agreement and military cooperation agreement were also signed, exchanged to Britain's support of Iraq admission to the League of Nations. Thus, Britain guaranteed that Iraq would be economically and politically dependent on it. Faisal felt safe with the British. After Faisal's death, his son, King Ghazi, who was very different in character and ambitions, inherited the crown. At the beginning of his reign, a great massacre was carried out among the Assyrians. In October 1936, a military coup led by General Bakr Sadki. King Ghazi died in a car accident in 4th of April 1939. Some claim that it was a British job, or maybe Nouri al-Said, the prime minister, that was very pro-British, or their inspiration, since Ghazi was considered an anti-British and nationalist. The same day he killed, in the 4th of April 1939, it was the first day of Passover. Thousands of Jews walked outside the Jewish neighborhood in Mosul. In the morning, a rumor spread immediately that the mob of incited Muslims was making its way to the Jewish neighborhood to kill the Jews, because they believed, they suspected that the Jews had a role in the murder of King Ghazi. The community leader issued an urgent call for all the Jews to return to their homes and lock themselves indoor. When the mob reached the Jewish community area, they were met by one of the city's Muslim dignitaries who claimed that the Jews had nothing to do with the murder, only the British. The mob moved towards the British consulate, broke into it, the compound, and murdered the consul, George Monk Mason. Following the murder, martial law was declared in Mosul, and the army restored the order. The Jews were a little bit more relaxed. It is important to note, although the British mandate ended in 1932, in 1939, Britain still had decisive influence on the affairs of the country and the active presence, both civilian, industrial, and military. And Ghazi's son, Faisal II, was only 4 years old when his father died, but he succeeded him as a king. But because he was underage, Prince Abdul Ilah, his uncle, served as a regent until 1953. He was just a symbol, a king in age of 4, but a symbol important for the monarchy to continue. He was actually the last king of Iraq. He was killed with his family in the 14th of July, 1958 revolution. The Ba'ath Party took power. That's the end of the British period. One short topic about the Nazi period, which is important for me to emphasize, that in September 39, Nouri Said canceled the relationship of Iraq with Nazi Germany because he was very pro-British, and he expelled all the German citizens to a British military camp in Khabania. The situation in Iraq was very fragile, and the hate, the hate for the British increased. The Iraqis, tribes, the Sunni, the Shiites, all became more and more nationalists. And in the government, and also there was a visit of Haj Amin al-Husseini. Maybe I have the picture here. Yes. Haj Amin al-Husseini, as you can see here, came to put more flames and fire in the hearts of the Iraqis to become more nationalist, and by that to revoke the British out from Iraq. Haj Amin al-Husseini was the Mufti of Jerusalem. He visited Iraq. He was a very close ally to Hitler. his arsenic propaganda also directed to the Jews of Iraq. During the Hashemi government, there was a guy called Rashid Ali Ghaliani, who was a fascist and nationalist. He served as a minister of interior, and he was the only one who was severely opposed to the British. And in 1941, he started a coup in the Iraqi government and turned it to a military dictatorship. The king, his family, and Nuri Said ran away to Jordan at that time. The new regime declared a war against Britain. German airplanes flew above Iraq, but didn't support much of the Iraqi new pro-Nazi regime. The British attacked them, and in June 1941, they won. When Rashid fled the country, ended up in Lebanon at the end of the day. This will be considered as the darkest time of the Jews in Iraq, because at that time, the whole atmosphere was against Jews, and that was when the Farhud in Baghdad happened. Jews were humiliated, put in prison with no charge, stole money from them and goods. And one of the events that differ Mosul from Baghdad in that sense is that on the 1st of June 1941, Chag Shavuot, Habib Salah was sitting in the telegram room in Mosul. He received a top urgent telegram reporting the massacre of the Jews in Baghdad, or the Farhud, which encouraged the Muslims of Mosul to do the same. Habib decided to hide that telegram and not to share, and maybe by that he saved the community. We don't know. But there was no Farhud at that time in Mosul. Afterwards, the British came, the pro-Nazis were arrested, and many Allies forces came through Iraq and also arrived to Mosul on the way. We said it's a very important way to the north. Among them, strangely, but came Polish Jewish soldiers who helped the Allies, who helped the British Army, and also other Jews, Holocaust survivors, that joined the Jewish British Brigade, and they fled from Europe, and they started to help the British army in that area. They came, and they were also hosted in the Jewish community of Mosul. Actually, this is the end of my lecture. I was focusing on those two important times. I didn't elaborate too much about the later, what would become the expel of the Jews from Mosul and from Iraq to Israel in 1950, 1951. I think that's deserve a whole chapter. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Nadav. I think it was quite a detailed talk that you gave, and a very difficult talk because it covered such a huge amount of history. But I think thank you for that. I wanted to ask people, who have comments or questions, please do put them in the chat. But until you do so, I've got a few questions of my own. One is, do you think the Jews of Mosul have suffered a bit from a sort of identity crisis, if you like? They're neither Kurdish Jews, nor are they sort of Iraqi Jews in the sort of sense, in the true sense of the word. I mean, is there what was their relationship with the Jews of Baghdad, for instance?
So we know that the Jews of Mosul came as one unit, as one group of Jews that left Samaria, the northern part of Samaria. They were more united. They were, I wouldn't say isolated, but they were as like a compound, like a strong, small community. Compared to Baghdad, in Baghdad, the Jews lived in few places and they expanded. In Mosul, they were always in one Al-Malh al-Yahud, the quarter of the Jews or the neighborhood of the Jews. They didn't mingle with others. Some weddings and some connections to other communities in Basra and in Baghdad. Mosul was a smaller city than Baghdad, less exposed to major trade and culture, but they still succeeded to do some trade. And therefore, we don't see a lot of influence came from Baghdad or other cities. So they were, I wouldn't say isolated, but I'm trying to find the English word for that sense. Well, Baghdad, well, my late father came from Baghdad, and I'm married to a lady that came from the Lanyado family from the Mosul. So it's a different kind of size of community. It's a different aspect of community. The identity, it's very interesting that you mentioned the North, Kurdistan, the Kurds. There were Jews in Kurdistan, in Kurdish villages up in the north, in the mountains. They're even more isolated, had less connection. I mean, we know by the stories of the travelers, which is, for me, it's fascinating. Benjamin Metudela and all the others brought to us information, that valuable information. And they arrived after many days of travel to Mosul. It means that Mosul was far, or although on the river, on the Tigris River, with connections to Baghdad, but still a remote area.
Okay. Yeah. I think Mir Lanyada would like to ask a couple of questions. Obviously, he has perhaps a family connection with Ezra Lanyada, who wrote the book on the Jews of Mosul.
Yeah, Mayor, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
That's the book, by the way. Sorry, Mayor.
Yeah.
That's the second edition of the book. And as I explained, we're trying to find a way to translate to English, but it's very hard these days.
Well, I'm happy to volunteer. Well, actually, maybe not. It's a big commitment. Thank you very much, Nadav. I just saw when you put up the title of the book in Hebrew that it's Mosul. It's Assad. Could I ask you to pronounce the word, please? Because I've heard different pronunciations.
Of the Mosul or the Assyria? Sorry.
No, the place you've spent today, Mosul.
Mosulin.
I've heard people call it Mosul. Jews from Mosul, referring to their hometown as Mosul. And
Mosul.
Yeah, that was my first question.
So first of all, first question, first answer. The information I got, first of all, this book is priceless. It's, although the second edition, I do have the first one, but there's not many changes, just expanding of things. The Jews of Mosul is written here officially as M-O-S-U-L, Mosul. When I searched the internet of documents, mainly from the World War I and before, and some documents that I read from, especially Benjamin Metudela, it's Mosul. I haven't heard any other pronunciation, but I'm taking the challenge, Mayor, to come back to you. You'll have my email in the probably in one of the slides.
Yeah,
or
well, I can put you in touch with Nadav. There's no problem there. Yeah, and your second question, very quickly.
It seems to me from what you've said that Jews of Mosul or Mosul were essentially homogeneous. They all came from and it seems that they have a longer unbroken history in Mosul than Jews of Baghdad. I'm a mixture. I've always thought my surname was of Halabi origin, from the Lanyados
It is
of Halab. Thank you. But I recently met in London a gentleman from Mosul, as he pronounces it, who told me that my name was very common in Mosul, which I believe you've confirmed. Um, what sorry, the point of my question is that if you look at the history of the Jews of Baghdad, it's very difficult to find families who had lived more than about 2 centuries continuously in Baghdad. It's very difficult to find Jews from Baghdad who go back, say, or who can trace their ancestors past the 17th century. But if I understood you correctly, Jews from Mosul can perhaps go back all the way, to
Right.
To the Assyrian,
yes.
yes.
I'm just wondering if I understood that correctly or not.
Yes. First of all, about your name. First of all, I'm very interested to know more about you, so we take it offline. But
Okay.
Lanyado is a Spanish name, obviously. What I've learned, at least, from running from in the family of my wife. And their sources are really from Aleppo, from Haleb in Syria. When it was changed to Mosul, I don't know, but you gave me another challenge to research. It didn't show a lot in the Mr. Ezra Lanyado book, but there are few surnames that I found and read about in all the articles and all the research that Ezra did. And well, Lanyado is one of them, but there's also Tzemach, there's Mariuma, and there are others that I can elaborate more. Maybe Lynn will give me the chance in a couple of months to prepare another lecture. But it's extremely interesting. And you're right. It's a small community that were so-called secured, not secured, but at least isolated. Therefore, the families, you find them more than 2 centuries on a row. By the way, Lanyado family, some of the family, one of the brothers or the uncles of Ezra left to Paris for trade. One of them studied, I think, in Syria or in somewhere else, studied law school, and then he moved to France to trade. And one of the family also moved with the trade to New York. And passed away in the 50s, in the 1950s or late 1940s. So there are a few names that are popping up to me with the history of the Lanyado family. But as I said, I will take it as a challenge.
Okay, yeah. All right, yeah, and of course,
Where are you located now,
Senator Ezra Lanyado was the last Jew in the Syrian parliament, so obviously he was a very prominent family. Okay, before we go to Ephraim Nissan, I have there's a mystery which I hope you'll solve for me, and that is it's often been pointed out that the language spoken in Mosul is very similar to the Iraqi Jewish dialect in Baghdad. Can you explain why that is?
Okay, so it really depends on the period of time. I think that with the trade, because the main trade started with Baghdad. What I've read, what I researched from Ezra book and from other resources is that the trade of cotton fabrication was from Mosul to Baghdad via the Tigris River.
Right.
Hence, the communication with the traders, most of them Jews in Baghdad, was with the dialect of the Baghdad
right.
Iraqi
That's
Arabic.
fascinating. You're right. Yeah, yeah. Okay, great.
That's, however, we should recall that when we're speaking about much earlier periods, what kind of languages? Was it Aramite, or was it
Aramaic,
kind of Aramaic or kind of Assyrian languages? Obviously, to us, that the Jews excelled in learning languages. Some of them even excelled with the British. They supported in many languages translators during the war and after the war. So it seems to me that this community was was very unique on the
Okay.
meaning of languages.
Let's go to Ephraim Nissan, who
Yes.
knows a
Hello,
lot
Ephraim.
First of all, I
about this
wanted
subject.
to answer that question. The
Yeah.
reason that the Mosul general dialect is similar to the Jewish and Christian ones of Baghdad is that in Caliphal times, that was the kind of Iraqi Arabic of everybody. But then in the Middle Ages, there was an influx of Bedouin
Bedouins.
tribes from the Arabian Peninsula, and central Iraqi dialects became Bedouinized. And only the Jews and the Christians in Baghdad retained the old Caliphal Iraqi Arabic, which also Mosul has.
Mhm.
And what I wanted to say, as somebody mentioned Mussolini and Mosul, the reason is that I remember that in Milan in the early 70s, there was a boy whose family name was Moslawita, that is Moslawi, that is the family from Mosul. But in Italian, Mussola and Mussolina is a kind of cloth. On the other hand, in Piedmont, or in the part of Italy bordering on France, Musso means a mule. For that reason, there was a group of partisans that had a mule, and they decided to, as he is a Musso, let us call him Mussolini. And they used to beat it because he was Mussolini.
So
On the
I
other
think,
hand, in
yeah,
the Venetians in northeastern Italy, there was the hamlet of Mussolino, which was exterminated by the Nazis as retribution for the actions of the partisans. Mussolino in that region means a mosquito.
Fascinating. But I think we are sort of digressing a bit from
Yes.
the Jews of Mosul
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
I have another question for you, Nadav, and that is, you mentioned this declaration that the Jews of Mosul made towards the end of the British mandate, saying that they wanted to be British. Isn't that correct?
No, they wanted British. They were revoking to the British, saying, if you are planning to leave us with those
Right.
the Muslims mob that always humiliating and hurting us, you better take us with you.
Right. So they actually wanted
They
to
wanted
leave.
to provoke it, yes.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
at the end of
yeah.
the day, it didn't work well for the Jewish community because then it was published. Actually, I didn't detail too much, but in the book, it stated that the British counselor there was very happy with that declaration, but he asked them, are you willing to sign officially on that declaration that I can show it to my officers or higher ranked officials in London? They
Yeah.
said yes. Proudly, they did it, and they made it a declared signature document, and that's how it was distributed in Mosul among the Christians and mainly the Muslims, and that started to bring a very bad atmosphere.
Right. So
Like
it
the
got them
hurting.
into trouble. That
Yes.
what year was it? About 1918 or something?
I will tell you in a minute.
Yeah. Well, don't worry about that, because there was a similar sort of move in Baghdad, wasn't there, where the dignitaries went to see Sir Percy Cox, was it the British High Commissioner or the Deputy British High Commissioner, and asked to be given British nationality. So, a similar kind of movement there. But it's fascinating that you have evidence of this declaration in Mosul.
Can ask a couple more
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Mayor.
Okay.
It was in 1920, 1921, I presume, but I'll find it in a minute.
Okay. Yeah. So sort of towards the beginning of the
Yeah.
1920s anyway. Yeah. That is fascinating. Okay. And just to clarify, if Mosul had become part of the French mandate, would it have been attached to Syria, or how would it have worked?
Interesting question, because Lebanon, Syria was already in control of France, which didn't hold there quite well like the British did. The British had their interest in the petroleum, therefore they traded some ideas with the French, saying that we will take Mosul area and Iraq in
Right.
general, and we'll give you some areas in the border with Germany for France, and they will
Yeah.
give you some percentages of the Ottoman Petroleum Company. There was a big argument, and it's called, by the way, the Mosul question. And the Turkish took it to other. They claim that the British are not playing fair, and they brought it to the League of Nations for a decision, and they call that as the question, the Mosul question. And it was,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like I said, it was at the end for the benefit of the British,
Right.
because they won the war at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The letter, the declaration that was published, it was in 1921,
Yeah.
in the middle of the year, and because they wanted to show the dissatisfaction
Yeah.
for the suggested independence to the Muslims or the Iraqis.
Right. So you're saying that this declaration got them into trouble with the Muslims, obviously,
Indeed,
because yeah.
indeed.
Right. Okay.
Okay, Mia, next.
Yeah. Do you want to ask another question, Mia?
Embarrassed to be taking up so much time.
No, it's okay.
Please forgive me.
I took a day off from work. No worries. Where are you located, Mayor?
I'm in London.
In London.
London.
And are you familiar with the Laniado family here in Israel?
No.
No.
We can talk about. I will forward my email address.
Yes, indeed. I think and I hope that Mordechai Laniado, who is a lieutenant colonel retired in Israel, is with us online. He lives in Israel. He's the brother of Ezra Laniado, and I hope that I will try to connect between the two of you.
I would love that. I would love that.
Okay, no problem. If anyone wants to get in touch with Nadav, just email me info@harif.org. Okay, so when we were talking just before we went on air, so to speak, you mentioned that there is a center of the Jews of Mosul in Israel, something I didn't know about at all. I thought that the Babylonian Heritage Jewry Heritage Center was the only one representing Jews from Iraq, but you now tell me there is this center for the Jews of Mosul. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, I think that in the early or the late 1980s, Ezra Laniado, Zichrono Livracha, created and built that center. It's an organization that gathered the immigrants from Mosul. The majority of the immigrants from Mosul, or Lima Hadashim from Mosul, came to Israel. Not like Baghdad, when you can find Baghdadians in London and in Los Angeles and in many other places. And the majority of them settled in Tirat Carmel, which is a town southern to Haifa, and in Tiberias and in Haifa itself. So, as I mentioned, Ezra Laniado was the mayor of Tirat Carmel and was a headmaster, and he gathered around him some major pillars of the community. And one of the community members was Shoshana Arbeli al-Muzelino, also Zichrono Livracha. She was a member of the parliament in the Labour Party in Israel, and she was Iraqi. She was very active, by the way, with Hillel, when they worked in smuggling or moving Jews from Iraq to Israel.
Shlomo Hillel.
Shlomo Hillel, yes.
Yeah.
And she was also supportive of that organization. He built that organization, and they even built a center in Tirat Carmel, which was later the years when the organization slowed down and there was nobody who managed it. It was captured by the city, by the municipality of Tirat Carmel, and they made it something else. These days, or last year or two, Mr. Moti Laniado, with his brother, are trying to revive that organization. They fulfilled with governors, with new managers, all volunteers. In the old days, I was a young student in Haifa University, and I helped them to digitalize some of the information. I was coming to the meetings with Shoshana Arbeli and Musolino, and I knew the people. And then there was a Dr. Bar-Oz, I think his name, that he was publishing every quarter, half year or 3 months, a small book called Minchat Ashur, the giving of Assyrian. I don't know how to translate my English. Sorry for my English.
Okay.
That little book contained information and traditions and minhagim of the Jews of Mosul, specifically of Mosul, and that actually deferred the organization from the big organization of Babel, Yotzei Bavel in Or Yehuda. As I said, these days, Mr. Laniado is trying to revive that. They put a lot of money to get all the information, documents, some articles about the community. And what I'm trying to convince them is to take that massive, unbelievable book of 418 pages and translate it to English. I hope I succeed. It's a project. It's something that we need to take as a project.
It's very, very important. Is there a building that's open to the public? Can people actually visit this center?
As I said, there was a very beautiful building that decorated by a special person, and to be a half-rounded building with very long windows, to be dedicated to the teaching the history of the Jews of Mosul, and put it as a library, and also to show their documents from the old days of Mosul. But as I said, the city, the municipality took over that building. And I presume that Laniado are trying to gain that back. I'm not sure. I don't know. But that's a fair question to ask, and I can elaborate on that.
Right. Okay. If there are plans to open the center to the public, please do let me know.
And could we ask Moti, would you like to contribute to the conversation? We'd love to have your feedback if you'd like to join in.
If Moti wants to say something.
Great.
Yeah.
Is Moti here?
Yes, Moti Laniado is on the call.
Moti, shalom.
He hasn't unmuted himself.
No. Okay. Meanwhile, Yitzhak Kerem, Professor Kerem, who knows everything about everything, says that he has written a lot about the Jews of Mosul and their synagogue and their holdings in their center. And there was a conference at Ben Gurion University in 2002, which included 5 presentations on Jews from Mosul, and he did a radio broadcast.
Can I get connected to Dr. Karen and to get that information?
Yitzhak, do you want to respond?
Perhaps, Yitzhak, people can get in touch with you?
I think
we don't know. Yes,
glitches.
sorry. Problems unmuting.
Yes, he said to ask him to send him.
If you send the email via
will.
Yeah. Okay. So information from Professor Kerem. If you want that information, please email me and I'll pass it on to Professor Kerem.
Brilliant. Okay, if anyone else wants to contribute or share some observations, if you want to raise your hand, I will see you and I will spotlight you.
So there's one question here before we close. That's from Ariel. who's very interested in music, and he wants to know
Al-Kuwaiti.
if they had an orchestra in Mosul.
Well, I didn't. There's a lot of information about the culture, schools, and the traditions in Mosul, but I couldn't find anything about orchestra. But it doesn't mean that it didn't happen there. But I will again, and a third challenge for me to search for things that connected to the music in
Okay.
Mosul.
All right, fantastic. So I think on that note, we will finish
Should we do
the formal part of
the
the
slideshow? Do the slideshow.
Oh, okay, so we'll have our commercial break, advertising our future events. Just wanted to say that your talk, Nadav, I think dovetails very well with Dina's talk that she gave, Dina Attar's talk that she gave in March 2021, and Lawrence put up the YouTube link. She talks about the Jews of Mosul, but she covers a slightly different time period and subject matter. So I do urge you to go and have a look at that recording, March 2021 on the Harif YouTube channel. So our commercial break. This is our next event. So we stay in Iraq and we talk about music. And then we have our big evening to commemorate the exodus of Jews from Arab countries and Iran in person at JW3 in London, but you can follow it online. All the details are on the Harif website. And then we have a cookery program in December before our film on the Jews of Syria. That's on the 9th of December. We will have 3 cooks talking about Hanukkah and what they prepare, Sephardi cooks, what they prepare for Hanukkah. So we get to the point where people are invited to say thank you or whatever they want to say. Yeah, we'll stop the recording. So those of you who were too shy to ask a question on the record, you're welcome to